So the next thing we need to talk about is how do we build the relationship between the Identity Vault and the application side. So if we want to modify Joe on the Identity Vault, how do we know which Joe to modify on the application side? There could be a couple Joes. Or how do we know which object to go to? And another thing is, if we have Joe and we have like given name and surname and title and phone number, how do I know to write those attributes to the application? Where do I know where to write them to? Because we all know that Identity Vault, which is eDirectory in the background, that our schema could be different from the application schema. Active Directory has their own schema, PeopleSoft has its own schema, SAP has its own schema, LDAP has its own schema. So really what we need to do is map our attributes to the application side attributes, and therefore if we change phone number, we know we're changing phone number on the application side. So the first thing we need to do is what they call schema mapping. So the business challenge is like I said, different applications support different classes and attributes. The identity management solution is a schema mapping rules, and it's pretty much straightforward. And what happens is when the driver developer, the Novell developer, develops this driver, they will go through and take the default schemas from both sides, and then they map them together. If you have any custom schemas that need to go in because you've extended your schema or so on, you would have to manually add those in. So let's look at this flow here. We have PeopleSoft here as an example, but notice here the second stop in is what they call the schema mapping policy. And basically that's where we're mapping the attributes either from the application side to the Identity Vault side or from the Identity Vault side to the application, depending on the channel, right? We have events coming from the Identity Vault on the subscriber, we're going to then map them to the application, and vice versa for they're coming from the application to the Identity Vault. So we noticed the schema mapping was the second stop in. Okay, so this input, these are basically policies or rules that help us format this XML and get it in the right way. So what we're doing here is let's go here to the schema mapping policy. So if I click here, it opens up the schema mapping, and then I'm going to click on here, and basically it's going to open up our schema mapping policy. As you'll see here, this is with the Active Directory. It will show us how we're doing our mapping. So users map to users, group is group, and you say they're the same name. Well, it is case sensitive, so we do map those. Now, if I go into, for example, non-class specific attributes, and one of the things you will learn with eDirectory attributes in the applications, you will learn their attributes. Because, if you go into the applications and you learn and you see like first name, well, what's the attribute name for first name? Well, that's given name. Last name is surname. So for example, if we go down here to given name and we highlight this, this will tell us what the mapping is on Active Directory side. Notice how it's similar in that case. Given name is mapped to given name, but there is no space. Okay? If I look at initials, which is the middle name, maps the initials, and notice how internet email address is mapped to mail. So we're mapping our attributes to Active Directory's attributes. And one thing you have to remember is Active Directory and iPlanet, for the most part, they have tried to follow the LDAP standard, but eDirectory was around long before LDAP was, so we obviously have our traditional naming standard. So that's why it looks a little different on eDirectory side instead of just LDAP mappings. Okay, let's just pick a few more. What about last name, which on eDirectory side is called surname. So if I look at surname, on Active Directory side that's called SN, and telephone number is telephone number. So those are the mappings that's by default. And like I said, you can go in and add any mappings. So you can click any attribute, a custom attribute, and you could map these here, and then you can go in here and pick the application side. This is a schema on the application side, and map them here and click add, and then you would have a new mapping. So if you go in, you can click this button here that says Refresh Application Schema. What that does is that goes in and actually queries the application schema and pulls those in, because if you went on the application and extended the schema over there, then we would need to pull that in so you could add it to the schema mapping. Alright, so just remember here, that's the schema mapping. Those are the schema mapping rules.